So I'd like to talk about sustainability, and as we discuss this topic, I'm curious, how have you seen this topic of sustainability evolve in terms of the conversation it gets around our industry? Steve?
Kevin, about 6-7 years ago when sustainability was becoming a buzzword,
Yes.
we weren't sure, is this a real factor or is this just one of those marketing gimmicks that retailers are using? But we've come to realize that the issue of sustainability is within the beef industry. It's here to stay. It's in our society.
Yes.
It goes from the producer at my end clear to the consumer. The concerns of everybody in between are a part of it. There is no attempt in it to try to take over anything on an operation. It's about society deciding what our goals and values are, and caring for the land, caring for the water, caring for the environment and animals is an essential part of being in the business today.
And Rick, have you seen the conversation intensify?
Yeah, I think we've continued to see the conversation change and evolve by seeing people want to know. They want to know how this product they enjoy is produced. It matters to them where their food comes from. And I think it's really interesting to me that farmers and ranchers have been stewards and producing sustainable operations forever. It's now the buzzword in the consumer land that we have to tell our story. And I think that's the challenge that we often face. I think Steve said earlier, we're generally private people. We don't like to go out and boast and tell our story, but it's something we as producers need to. Our industry is sustainable. In our particular case, we continue to tell the population center in New York City that low density land use of agriculture has been very good to their water. And that water is the cleanest unfiltered water supply in the world. And that's because of agriculture and forestry. Where it was developed east of the Hudson, that water supply has to be filtered.
And Stephanie, how about in Hawaii? What do you hear relative to the conversation around sustainability there?
That's a great question. So I'm the sustainability manager for Kualoa Ranch.
Okay.
And I am their first sustainability manager. But the concept of sustainability is really just caring for the land. It's that triple bottom line: economic, social, and environmental. It's all these factors that go into our decision making. So when I started as sustainability manager, I came in thinking I need to change things. But really, it was putting a face and a name to this really long-held value and tradition of land stewardship and caring for the community. So it was really just almost a rebranding, if you will, of these really long-held family values of the land. In terms of Hawaii, development pressure is huge. You know, land values are higher than ever. Everyone wants a piece of paradise, if you will. And really, Hawaii has endangered species, so that conservation against ranching or any sort of agriculture is really strong. But what I've seen in recent years is the focus on local agriculture and ranching, and how working with your partners in the watershed, ultimately it's all about diversity in the watershed. So that sustainability, every single person has a different definition of sustainability. You're never going to hit that 100% mark that everyone agrees with. But if you're on that path of continuous improvement and communication too, I think people are much more willing to work together so you can work towards this idea of sustainability in whatever definition you may have.
That's great. Quick question for each of you. Give me an example of one conservation practice that you've implemented in your operation that our viewers may benefit from. Right?
Gravity-fed water, I mean, we're in the mountains, so that's helpful, but by putting all the water for the cattle underground into their individual pastures, it really strengthened our rotational grazing ability. And at the end of the day, the water was key. And we were fencing the cattle out of the streams. We were doing all the things that you should do. We didn't want cattle drinking out of ponds or other areas to help protect that water supply that will be in the city of New York in 24 hours. But we needed to open that up, and burying all those lines and getting continuous flow gravity is a beautiful thing. When it was 26 below in New York last week, all our waters were running out of their pasture, never staying in, and open with no electric.
Outstanding. Stephanie?
So in Hawaii, our soils are pretty depleted, just being a tropical ecosystem. It comes with the landscape. So we really try to focus on soil health. So obviously one practice we do is rotational grazing as part of our grass-fed beef operation, and also utilizing green waste and mulching for our fields. We work with partners and arborists who give us their green waste, and we're able to mulch it and build compost that we can apply to our fields. In Hawaii, we have a diversity of soil orders. We are the most diverse in terms of soil orders. So there's definitely a huge need for conservation practices to address all the different resource concerns with all the different soil types. Because as we know, your soil is definitely not the same.
Very different. Tropical paradise in southeastern Colorado.
It is.
What's one conservation practice you would identify?
Wow, Kevin, one. I'm gonna have to go with a combination there. Our grazing management plan,
Yes.
the implementation, and that was a 30-year process.
Okay.
Started when we graduated from college, and it's continuing to evolve. It's an involvement every day, every month, every year.
Yeah.
So we keep working on that. Our conservation easement was a tool that we used for succession to make sure that the family business can continue going for family members that want to get there.
Yes.
And as we all talk about in the West, but it affects even Rick in the East, a drought management plan. Once we started implementing a drought management plan, I can't tell you how having that written down and discussed with the family, how that provides you a sense of comfort going through the year. You know what you're gonna do in June and August and October, and follow that plan along with your grazing management. So those have been probably the three main tools that have helped us with our conservation on Beatty Canyon.
So what do you say to the producer who says, yeah, those things add cost, but they really don't improve the profitability of my operation?
Well, certainly that wouldn't be the case in our end. I mean, stronger rotational grazing, increased weaning weights, unequivocally. So that increased value. The other part that I would say is it does help market your product and tell your story. And if you tell that story, you can capitalize on it economically, and people want to know how that product was raised.
Steve, do you agree?
Yes, I do. Over the years, as we've continued to work on our conservation, we've shortened our interval from birth to weaning, but at the same time, our weaning weights have gone up, and we attribute that to a longer growing season by our grazing management plan with higher quality vegetation available. At the same time, we've reduced our overhead costs because we don't feed as much purchased product to our cattle. The Lord made them perfect to live out there and graze and convert and rebreed every year. We just got to provide those minimal inputs that they need to sustain themselves.
Stephanie, can sustainability conservation practices also add to profitability?
Absolutely. I think I would agree with Rick. It helps you tell your story for the public and the consumer ultimately. And that's going to raise your value just in terms of marketing and branding alone and your reputation. For us, at Kualoa, people come for the tours. They come because we're the scene of Jurassic Park. But throughout the tour, we are talking about all our different conservation practices. So, in terms of not only raising the price of beef and sharing that story, in agritourism too, that's a chance for you to show land stewardship in action, conservation practices, and being able to connect people. People might understand mulching a little bit more than a drought management plan, but that doesn't mean you can't start to talk about these practices so that you're encouraging others to take care of the land around them, but also care for the ranchers and other stewards of the land who are taking care of it.